Hi everyone, and thanks for joining me back. We continue to get to know the layer panel, and in this lesson, we will learn about the 3D world in After Effects, while we create the text animation you see in the example. We will understand the difference between a 3D layer and a non-3D layer. We will create a camera and understand how to use it professionally. In addition, we will learn about motion blur and many other cool things. So, let's get started. So before we turn our text layers into 3D layers, I want us to pre-compose the text layer. Of course, I don't have to do it right now. I can pre-compose the text after animating it. But it will be much more convenient for me to work in a separate pre-comp without all the layers here getting in the way. Especially since I know that soon I will split this layer into 3 separate layers to animate each one separately. Besides, it's the right work process. That's how professionals work. So let's put the text layer into pre-comp, right-click on it, and choose Pre-compose and call it Title. Make sure these 2 marks are checked, and press OK. And here, a new pre-comp was created, which we can, of course, also see in Project Panel. Let's enter the pre-comp we created. So first thing, let's divide this layer into 3 layers with 1 word written in each layer. Duplicate the layers using the Ctrl-D shortcut. And again, Ctrl-D. Let's turn off the first 2 layers. And in this layer, we will leave only the word big, and delete everything that is unnecessary. We will turn off this layer and turn on the second one. Here, we will leave the word cat, and delete everything that is unnecessary, including the line above. And in the last layer, we will leave the word weak and delete everything that is unnecessary. Great! When we turn on all the layers, we will see all the words placed up here. That's not a problem. We can just grab the word weak, go to Selection tool and move this layer here. Now we will grab this layer and move to the middle. Let's also eliminate the shy function. And now, as you noticed, the anchor point is not located in the center of the layer. You see, the anchor point is here. Let's place the anchor point of all the layers together using the shortcut we learned, Ctrl-Alt-Home. So we'll select all the layers and press Ctrl-Alt-Home. In this way, the anchor point of each layer jumps to the center automatically, instead of going layer by layer and moving the anchor points manually. Let's press Ctrl-S and save the project before we continue. Now let's design our title. Get to the character, and change all the letters in bold. You can find the font in the main folder of the course you downloaded from me. There is a video that also explains how to install the font. You can find the link for the video in the descriptions, or in the main folder of the course. Before I continue, I want to point out that there are much easier ways to animate titles, as you can see in the example now from the text animation course, where we learn all the animations that can be done with typography in After Effects. The graphic designers among us will relate to this course, because I know you love typography. In our lesson, I will use typography only to explain the 3D world. By playing with text layers, you can learn the 3D world in a very clear and fun way. For those who don't see the layer panel in this way, I remind you, you just have to click on the toggle switch here to see the option to turn layers into 3D. So let's click here and turn our layers into 3D layers. It seems that nothing happened, but if we select the layers, we will see colored handles. And now, I will explain the difference between a 3D layer and a regular 2D layer. I will isolate this layer to demonstrate it. Now I will return this layer to a regular layer and open the position parameter. There are two values in a regular layer in the position parameter, moving the layer to the sides up and down. I will press Ctrl Z. Now I will press R to open the rotation parameter, and here, as you can see, we can rotate the layer to two sides only. I will press Ctrl Z. And now, if I turn this layer into a 3D layer, notice that now we have additional properties in the rotation parameter. Now in rotation, there are 3 different directions of rotation. 3 different axes. Rotation on the Z-axis, which was before. There is also rotation on the Y-axis. And there is also rotation on the X-axis. And if I get to the position parameter, I will also see that I have a new axis for moving the layer here. Previously, we could only move the layer sideways, up and down, but now we have a new axis of movement, away from the camera and close to the camera. And this is actually the big difference between a 3-dimensional layer and a regular layer. Okay, so now let's learn what a camera is in After Effects. But first, I want to explain what I meant when I said that the layer moves toward the camera and against the direction of the camera. I refer to the default camera that opens in After Effects once we create a 3D layer. Here I can see that I am now seeing the scene through After Effects' default camera. In projects with simple 3D scenes, you don't have to work with a camera. In our case, even though the scene is very simple, let's create a camera and work with it, to know how to use it. To create a camera in After Effects, we need to right-click here in the gray area, go to New and choose Camera. Now the camera settings window pops up. We will soon talk about everything. In the meantime, let's just make sure that this parameter is checked, and here we are at 35 mm. Later we will understand the differences between all the different cameras. So we will select one camera node here and 35 here. We will click OK and see that a new layer has been created in the layer panel, which is a camera type layer. This is actually our camera in the scene. As you can see, we don't see the camera in the scene. Let's see where it is, and learn about the different views we use while working in a 3-dimensional space. If I get here, a 3D view pops up. I can see that the selected view is the active camera. Camera 1. Here I see it up here as well. That is, now we see through the camera lens called Camera 1. This is the camera we created a few seconds ago. And now, if I click on top, I'll see something completely different. I will zoom out a bit, and now I will explain to you exactly what we see here. What we see here is the whole scene from an upper angle, as if we were a director standing on the ceiling and seeing what was happening in the scene. We don't see through the lens of the camera now. We see the whole scene from the outside. Here I see my layers from above. And this is actually the camera in the scene. I see the camera looking at the scene's 3 layers. This is the camera. When I select the active camera, I actually see through the camera's lens. Here you can look at the whole scene from the right angle. Now we are out of the camera lens, and we are now a director who sees the scene from the side. On the right side, there is also a very useful angle called Custom View. From here, we, as directors, see the entire scene from a semi-profile angle. Here are my text layers, and here is the camera we created, which actually looks at the text. And now, let's talk about the tools that help us move in this space. These are the tools we skipped in the first lessons. But now that we have a camera, we can use and talk about them. The first tool is the Orbit tool, with which I can move the scene up and down. With this tool, we can move in the scene from left and right angles. And with the help of the last tool, we can move the scene back and forth. To be honest, I have never used these tools. Mainly I use the views found here. Let's go back to View Top and select the Selection tool. Now I see the whole scene again from above. And now I can move my camera back and forth. But when I move it, I don't see what is happening in the scene. To see what is happening in the scene, I have to work with two views. Now we are working with one view, and to work with two views, I will click here. And here I got another view. If we click on it, we can see a small blue frame around it. That's how we know that we are now dealing with this view. And in this view, we see what the lens of camera 1 sees. And in this view, we see the scene as directors and look at the whole scene from above. From a top angle. You should pay attention to the small blue frame marking, because all the options found here will be relevant for this view, the view I selected. For example, if I turn on the default background, I will see that the background turns on in this view. And if I now select this view, all these settings will affect the view I selected. That is, if I turn the background on and off, now it will turn on and off in this view. Defining the quality of a quarter or full and all these stuff work for both views together. It is impossible to set different preview qualities for each individual view. Even when I select this view, I will change here to a quarter, and if I select this view, I will see that this is also a quarter. If I change here to full, it will also change here to full. But apart from that, everything can be adjusted per view. For example, the grid. In this view, I can work using a grid. And in this view, I won't see that grid. Unless I will select this view and activate the grid for it as well. Okay, so now let's go back to the camera and move it back and forth again. So I'll grab the camera from the Z-axis and move it forward. Notice what happens in the view on the right. The text supposedly grows. But it didn't get big. It seemed big to us because we zoomed in on it with the camera. As happens in the real world. You can also move the text toward the camera. I will grab the layer of the word cat from the Z-axis and move it toward the camera. Now let's take the word week and move it away from the camera. We will bring the word big closer to the camera. We can also move it down like this so that it enters the frame. Let's select all the layers and move them down while holding the Shift key. It is very important to practice this and understand how to work in three-dimensional space. And more importantly, to understand the different views. For example, in View Top, we see something different from the view of Active Camera 1. This is because, in View Top, we simply look at the whole scene from above. And in Active Camera 1, we see what the lens sees and what the viewer will see when we render the project. We don't always have to work from the top view. Let's make sure that this view is selected in the blue frame, and I will go to change the view to left. And now, we will see the scene from the side. On the left side. Before learning to move the camera, it is very important to learn to work with the different viewing modes. All the views are meant to help us navigate the three-dimensional space. There is no specific way to work in three-dimensional space. Because the way of working between the different views changes from scene to scene. So, as we see, all three layers are at different distances from the camera, because we placed them there. But let's say that now we want all the layers to be the same distance from the camera as they were in the beginning. As you can see, it's impossible. Know that the alignment options do not work with 3D layers. But what can work is the shortcut, Control-Home. As you can see, all the layers are now centered in the middle. Now I can go back to View Top and arrange the layers as they were at the very beginning before we moved them away from or closer to the camera. So I'll move the word weak down. It's convenient for us to move this layer down from this view, active camera 1. Now let's also move the word big to where it was at the beginning. Okay, now let's grab all the layers and place them down a bit. Excellent. So after we got used to moving in the three-dimensional space, we move on to learning about the different settings in the camera. Let's start by learning the difference between a one-node and two-node cameras. Let's start with a one-node camera. To open the camera settings, we need to double-click on the layer of the camera. And now a window of the camera settings popped up. We selected one-node camera and clicked OK. To explain the difference between the two types of cameras, I will use the position parameter. Notice the movement of the camera when I change the values from here. We can move the camera forward and backward, up and down, and of course, left and right. Notice that when I move the camera, I literally move the whole camera itself. And now, let's change the camera to a two-node camera. Double-click on the layer, and select two-node camera. You will notice that as soon as we selected this camera, an additional parameter called point of interest was added. We will click OK and try to understand what it means. A point of interest is another anchor point of the camera. Let's see how it works. Notice now, if we move the camera to the side, it will always look and be locked to the point where the point of interest is. Unlike the one-node camera, it simply moved without locking on a certain point when we moved it. If I move the camera up or down, it will react like this. If I move the camera forward, then it will react like this. And a very interesting camera angle will be created. More than that, we can also move the point of interest. For example, sideways, forward and backward, up and down. You can create very interesting angles with the help of the point of interest. Play with it and try to reach the same camera angle as mine. It doesn't have to be one-to-one. I just want you to feel what it's like to move the two-node camera. So after we understand the differences between one node and two nodes, let's try to understand what these millimeters are. It's basically different dimensions of the camera lens. As you can see in the example, different lenses produce different visibility using them in the real world. So we have the exact different lens sizes in After Effects as well. Now we are on a 35mm lens. And if we change the lens to 15mm, you will notice what will happen to the camera here. The camera seemed to become wider, and when we clicked OK, it seemed as if we moved away from the text. We didn't actually move away from the text. It just looks that way because we changed the lens. The distance of the camera and its position in the composition did not change. And because we see the text in this way now, we can get closer to it. We can get closer by changing the position and the point of interest together, but it will take a long time because we have the point of interest here. That's why it's better to bring the camera directly from here. We will grab the camera from its center, as soon as we see that the camera icon looks like this, XZ. And notice how my text looks now. Look how an aggressive camera angle is created compared to the 35mm lens. And now, if we change the lens to 80mm, we will have to move the camera back. The text will look different. So with the help of different lenses, you can create different angles in the scenes. Okay. So now let's double-click on the camera and return it to the one-node camera, 35mm, just like it was at the beginning, and position it in the middle. Notice that even after I place the camera in the middle, we still don't see the text. Why is it happening? If I change the view to see it from the side, we will see that the camera is below the text layers. It happened because we played and moved the camera while playing with the different lenses. This is another great reason to always use different view angles when working in 3D space. Let's see the scene from different angles again. For example, in the front, it's as if the camera is looking in the direction of the text. I'll see that the camera is indeed down here. Left, I will watch the scene from the side. Top, we see the scene from above. The back view is like the front, only from behind. You see, it's as if the camera is looking in our direction. Right, I'll view the scene again from the side, and from that view, I can easily move the camera up until the camera is at the same height as the text layers. And now, we can go back to the top view. Most of the time, I like to work from this view because it is convenient for me to move the camera back and forth. So after we understand the differences between the types of cameras and the different types of lenses, let's learn about the additional settings that exist for the camera. Like a depth of field. So as we know, if we close the layer of the camera and open it again, we will see the basic transform properties that exist in every layer, such as the position and rotation. The camera has several axes for the rotation parameter, just like every 3D layer. Okay, let's close the transforms. And apart from basic transforms, we can see that there is another property called camera options. Let's open it up and see what we have here. And the first thing we will talk about is the depth of field. To understand how the depth of field works, I want us to take the cat layer and move it closer to the camera. It will be convenient for us to grab the layer from the top view. Grab the Z-axis and drag the layer toward the camera. That's enough. We can now lift the layer a little, from the Y-axis, this time using this view. Now let's place the word, weak, and move it back. And bring it down a little bit. And we'll move the word big up a bit. And now, let's go back to the camera and activate the depth of field. Click here. And now if we move away a little, we will see that a new line has been added to the camera. If I turn off the depth of field, the line will disappear. This line determines where the focus will be. For example, I want the focus to be only on this layer, which is actually the word cat. So first, I need to find where this layer is located in the 3D space. If I select the word, I will see that it is the closest layer to the camera. And because it is closest to the camera, it looks big. So now I will mark the position of this word using guides. For that, we'll click here on the gray area. We'll press Ctrl-R to take out the rollers, create a guide out of the roller, and place it exactly where the layer I want in focus is. We don't have to use guides. I'm just showing that there is such a possibility. Okay, so after we know where the area we want to focus is, you can press Ctrl-R to close the rollers. And now, let's go to the focus distance parameter and change the values until we see that the distance line reaches the location we marked. So I'll drag the parameter when I press Shift, so that the values change in big jumps. And here, the focus distance is where I wanted, but I still don't see any change. It's because the aperture is low. Let's change it to 100 and see what happens. We can already feel the depth of the field. As you can see, what is far from the focus distance line looks more blurred, and what is really close to the focus distance line looks really sharp. that is, in focus. Let's increase the effect and change the aperture to 300. That way, we can see the difference in the depth of field even more. I think it's a bit too much, so let's change it to 250. An important thing to know about the depth of field is that, the more aperture there is, the harder it will be for the computer to render the scene. That means the project may work very slowly. So don't use it if you don't have to. So as we said, the word cat is in focus because the focus distance line is where this layer is. Now let's make the word big to be in focus. For this, we need to drag the focus distance line to where the big layer is. And here, the word big is in focus, and the word cat is not, because the line of focus distance is very far from it. And the word weak is also a bit fuzzy. Now let's shift the focus to the word weak. So now the word cat and big are not in focus and the word weak is in focus. You can also increase the strength of the blur and the blur level. These are the main properties you need to know about the depth of field. The cameras in After Effects are a very complex subject, and it is impossible to explain it all in one lesson. That's why I created a special course in which we learn to create a scrolling website animation using the camera. All movement of the scene is created by animating a camera. Okay, and now let's go back to our scene and try to understand a little more about how the depth of field works. For the purpose of the demonstration, let's go to the rotation parameter of the word cat and rotate the layer on the y-axis, approximately 54 degrees. And now, let's move the camera really close to the word. Take the focus distance and change the value until the line of the focus distance reaches the layer of the word cat. You can drag the value while holding the Shift key. And now, the letter C will be in focus. And because this layer is rotating, the focus only touches its first letter. We can drag the focus to the letter T. It's somewhere around here. And now the letter T is in focus. And that's it. Practice navigating in the 3D space, so you feel comfortable using it, and not be afraid of it like many other people who start learning After Effects. Alright, so that's it. We're done talking about the depth of field, and now let's press Ctrl Z a few times until we get to the moment where the layer isn't rotated. The depth of field can be turned off from here. Let's close the camera options and continue. A nice thing to know about three-dimensional space is that because of the distances between the layers according to the camera, when we move the camera back and forth, we will have a kind of parallax effect. I will expand on this topic in the course I mentioned earlier, in which we animate website scrolling. Now we will learn how to animate the camera and how to create cool camera movement animations. But before that, bring all our layers back to the center, and return the scene to how it was in the first place. Now an important tip: if you want to change the camera again to a 2-node camera, something strange will happen. Let's see what I'm talking about. We will click on the camera twice and change it to a 2-node camera, and it will seem that the whole scene has changed and the camera is looking in some direction. Click OK. This happens because when we use the 2-node camera, the camera was placed in a certain location. Then we switch to the 1-node camera and place the camera in a different location. And now that we're back to the 2-node camera again, it's according to the new position of the 1-node camera we just used. Anyway, it's not a problem. To solve it, we can reset the camera settings. You just have to go to the transforms of the layer and click here. This will reset the settings of the 2-node camera. Okay. So after learning this little tip, let's return to one node camera and start learning camera animation. So, like every layer in After Effects, to do any kind of animation, I first need to find the parameter that I'm going to animate. In our case, we only want to move the camera forward, so that I will use the position parameter. Select the layer and click P. And now, we will use the animation method from the end to the beginning. That means the camera will be in this position at the end of the animation. For example, in the second 4, I will create a keyframe with this value. And at this time in the timeline, I'll drag the camera and place it in front of the text. I can change the value from the layer or grab the Z-axis and move the layer from this view. So now the camera moves back, and the text is revealed. As you can see, because we animated the position parameter, a path was created. Just like it was created for a shape created by a pen tool, and just like it was created for every layer with a position animation. Like any layer in After Effects, the camera is also just a layer. So when we animated the position parameter, a path was created. And like any path in After Effects, we can grab a certain point and move anywhere we decide. I will press Ctrl Z. We can use the Convert Vertex tool to make the points round. I will select the Convert Vertex tool. I will click here once on the point, and once here as well. And to move the handles, we need to go back to the Selection tool and then move the handles this way, which will create a more interesting camera movement. Suppose I want the camera to go right through the letter. We can move that handle and point it until it looks like the camera is in the middle of the letter. This is how it looks. We learned how to create a simple camera animation, and now let's try to create a slightly more complex one. But before that, let's delete the current keyframes on the camera. As I mentioned earlier, we need to pay attention to the order of deleting the keyframes to position the layer in a specific place. In our case, I want the camera to be without keyframes and to stay standing where it is standing in the last keyframe. That is when the animation is finished. Therefore, the first keyframe I will delete will be the keyframe at the beginning. Now the camera has jumped to the last keyframe. Exactly in the place I want her to be. And now, I can delete this keyframe as well, and the camera will still be where I wanted it to be. Now let's learn how to create a slightly complex camera animation. I want us to create a camera animation around the entire text, meaning that the camera will rotate around the layers of the text. First, let's see how not to do it, and then we'll figure out how to do it smartly. So I can do a position animation for the camera to move from here, then get to here, then move it here, then move the camera and try to get to the first point it was. I'll also have to make the path rune manually, then try to create as accurate a circular path as I can. And now, if I check what I got, I will see that the camera is moving, but not looking at the text. So I can add a rotation animation. For example, at this point in time, the camera will look here, and when we move forward with the animation, I need the camera to look here. In short, as you understand, many actions are made for an unprofessional result. I will delete all the keyframes and try to do it with the 2-node camera. Maybe it will be easier because this camera has a point of interest. At least when I animate the position, the camera keeps looking at the text. This way requires me to try to work as precisely as I can. Once again, a lot of actions for nothing. So I will delete the keyframes I created, and now let's see how to do it in a smart way. What will help us in such a case is a null object. I will explain. First, I will change the camera back to 1-node camera. And now, I will create a new null object. Right-click, New null object. As we can see, the null I created is not a 3D layer, and for the null to work with the camera, I also need to turn it into a 3D layer. So after creating the null and turning it into a 3D layer, I will link the camera to the null. By doing so, we are creating a new kind of anchor point for the camera. As you can see, the null is located here, and the camera is here. And as soon as I link it to the null and turn it, the camera will move with it. I rotate the null on the y-axis, and the camera rotates with it because we connected it to the null. I will press Ctrl Z. And now let's see what happens if I connect the camera when the null is located at the exact position of the camera. So I'll move the null to the camera's location and parent the camera to the null. Now the camera will rotate with him, but this time it will rotate in this way. That is why it is very important to place the null in the center, and only then link the camera to the null. And now, when I rotate the null, the camera will move along with it in this way. Now I can create a rotation animation for the null. In the beginning, I will create keyframe 0. And instead of turning the null manually until it reaches 360 degrees, I can simply write here 1. That is 1 turn. And now the camera rotates 360 degrees around the text. I will delete the keyframes. And now I want you to see that it is possible to make an animation so that the camera rotates under or over the text. To understand it more clearly, let's work in one view, and we will change the view to a custom view. From here, I see everything I have in the scene. This is the text, this is the camera, and here is the null. The camera is now attached to the null. If I rotate the null from the x-axis, the camera rotates together with the null, which is what moves this camera. Now we'll go back to 2 views. In this view, I'll make sure I'm on active camera 1's view, and in this view, I'll make sure I see the scene from the top. It is very important to repeat these actions and learn to work between the different views while working with the camera. We will not create keyframes for the null. I just wanted to move between the different views and practice this subject with you again. Because it can be confusing at first, and only after practicing it a few times, we start to understand how to work with it. Alright, we can delete this null now, and move on. Now I want to teach you how to reset the views. I will explain what I mean. For that, let's go back to one view again. Now we see the scene from custom view 1. When you play with the different orbit camera tools, let's say you rotated the view to such an angle by mistake, and now custom view 1 is ruined. Instead of returning the custom view to its original angle, we can just reach here and select Reset Custom View 1. And here, the custom view 1 is back to its original angle. To remind you, this view is not what you see in the final animation. What we see in the final animation is what the camera sees. And to return to what the camera sees, we need to change the view to the active camera. Alright, so after we learned about the camera and the different views, let's go back to our video and animate the title. So as I told you, we don't have to use the camera when we don't have camera movements in animation. In our case, the 3D text simply enters the frame. Therefore we don't have to use the camera here, so let's delete it. Now we'll go back to 2 views. We can animate these layers and use After Effects default camera. Select this view. Let's make sure we are on the active camera. And now, we will animate the text in this way. I'll press Ctrl Z. Select this view. And set the preview to fit. And now, before we animate the layers, let's design the title a bit. I will scale this word down. I can use rollers and guides to work more precisely. I can turn on the background here to see the scene more clearly. And continue to design the title. I'll move the word here. I'll increase this word a bit. Now let's select all the layers and move them here. You can also move them with the arrows on a keyboard, while holding down the Shift key. When we are satisfied with the design, we can hide the rollers, delete the guides and start with the animation. Once again, we will use the animation method from the end to the beginning because we already know where the text should stand at the end of the animation. So let's get to second number 2 with the time indicator. Select all the layers, press P, and create keyframes for all of them. Now let's go back to the beginning of the animation. Grab all the layers from the Z-axis and bring them closer to here. I want to reach a state where the text is not visible. So we don't see this layer anymore, and that's great. But we do see these 2 layers. What we can do is place this layer at the top, which will be its starting point. The starting point of this layer will be a little bit above, right in front of the camera. And move it forward. And now, I'll move the layer a little bit here so that it goes right between the letter A, and I'll drag the layer even further ahead until I don't see it. The path created is slightly diagonal. It really doesn't matter to us because what we wanted to create is for the entrance to be created through the letter A. It's cooler that way. No one will notice that the text enters in a slightly diagonal motion. Now we can change the keyframes to easy ease, using F9. And change the velocity to 85 by 85 as usual. This is how it looks in the graph. The layers movement will start slowly, and at that moment, the layers will pick up speed. And this is how it looks. We finished animating the title in the video. And we continue to learn about more settings that exist in the layer panel. So let's go back to one view and talk about motion blur. This is the icon found here. What is a motion blur? A motion blur is a blur created when the layers move quickly. I will set the motion blur for all layers and activate it from here. This function will slow down the render times, but it creates a nice blur effect. And now, let's learn how to control the intensity of the blur. For this, we need to get to the composition settings. So press Ctrl K. And now go to Advance. The first thing is the shutter angle. The higher the shutter angle, the harder it will be for the computer to render the scene. Let's set it at 150. The second thing is the amount of duplicates that are created. We'll leave it at 15. It's better not to touch these 2. Click OK and see what we get. Now let's improve the animation, using the principle in animation we learned, called overlapping action. This principle means that we can create a more interesting animation by delaying our layers, meaning that the layers will start moving one after the other and not all together at the same time. In our case, I want this layer to enter the frame first. After that, I want this layer to enter so that I will move it a few frames after in the first layer. We will put this layer in the last frame. You can extreme the delay a little more. If we want to change the order of the entry of the layers, then we need to change the positions of the layers in this way. A good time to save the project with Ctrl S. And now, we'll use this opportunity to clean our project. We'll go to Edit, Purge, All Memory and Disk Cache, and click OK. Good, now we can continue. I'll change back to Pen Tool, just for no reason. And now, I will teach you a little trick to use the color palette in our project. Let's say we want to change the text color to yellow from the color palette we have. We can go to the search bar in the project panel and search for the asset called Colors. We can drag it to the scene and sample the color. Or I can leave it there. Select all the text layers. Go to the character. Select the eyedropper and sample the color I want. That is, you don't have to put it into the composition. And now let's go back to Master Comp. Click on the X so we'll see the project panel as usual. And we'll continue learning about the layer panel. And this time, we will learn about the different blending modes. Let's see what it is. To see the different blending modes, click here. Once again, I remind you, if you see this window in the way it is shown now, it is perfectly fine. It's just that when I recorded this lesson, the version of After Effects I was working on was version 2022. And if you're working on version 2023, then you'll probably see this panel like this. In the following lessons, I will also update to the 2023 version. Let's go back to blending modes. Those who have worked in Photoshop are probably familiar with this operation. With the help of the different modes, you can create an interesting visual combination between several layers. The same thing exists in After Effects. So if we click here, we will see all the different blending modes. What's annoying about this is that to check different blending modes, we have to open this list and choose a new mode every time. But instead, we can use a handy shortcut that switches between the different modes without me having to switch between them manually. I have to select the layer whose modes I want to change, then just hold the Shift key and press plus or dash. Press Shift and plus a few times and notice that the modes change here. Shift and minus will bring the previous mode. Play with it and remember this shortcut. In our case, we will use a blending mode called Overlay. Now let's arrange the project. That is, now we will decide which animation will start first and which after. We can move the pre-comp of the title below because the loader is the first thing that happens in the video. Let's turn off the color layer for now. And now I want the leopard video to start right when the loader animation ends. So, first of all, I want to check at which exact point the animation of the loader ends. For this, let's enter the pre-comp of the loader, and present all the keyframes we created here. If we don't see the keyframes, we can simply press U, when no layer is selected. Click several times until you see the keyframes. And now I see that the end of the animation starts from here, and from here, the background starts to disappear. I will stand at this time point with the time indicator, and when I go back to Master Comp, the time indicator will stand in the same place. This is great for us, because now we can add a marker at this specific point in time with the asterisk key, or right-click, Marker, add marker. And now I have a mark where I know the yellow background of the loader animation is starting to disappear. This is an excellent point to start the pre-comp of the video and the title. Move both pre-comps to this point. And now, because the title and the video enter at the same time, I can cut the pre-comp of the title, Ctrl X, enter the pre-comp of the video and paste the pre-comp of the title here. Ctrl V. As you can see, as soon as we passed the pre-comp, it was located at this point in time, second 2, because we copied it from Master Comp when this pre-comp was located at this point in time. This is not a problem. We will simply place the pre-comp at the beginning of the timeline. In this way, we keep the project organized. Let's go back to the Master Comp and see how it all looks together. Give After Effects some time to load the scene. Looking great. A good time to press Ctrl S and save the project. Now we can close these pre-comps here, and with that, we reach to the end of this lesson. In the next lesson, we will animate the logo and learn about one of the most important topics in After Effects, track mats, and many other cool things. See you in the next one.